Why was the sky trembling that morning? Why did the sound of distant rotors feel more like a warning than a rescue? Maria Santos paused, her stethoscope pressed against the chest of an old woman in the clinic, and held her breath. The vibration wasn't thunder. It wasn't storm. It was something darker. The roar grew louder and the windows rattled in their fragile frames. Dust lifted from the wooden floorboards. Maria's patients, elderly, frail, some barely able to walk, looked at her with frightened eyes. She forced a smile. Calm, always calm, but her own heart betrayed her, hammering against her ribs. She set the stethoscope aside and went to the window. Two helicopters dropped from the clouds, engines screaming, downwash scattering everything not nailed down. The blades chewed the mountain air with merciless rhythm. This wasn't the quiet landing of medical aid or supply transport. This was aggressive, tactical. Her stomach tightened. The men who emerged weren't soldiers of any army she recognized. No insignias, no patches, just black tactical gear, rifles slung low, faces hidden behind masks. Their movements were too disciplined to be local criminals. Mercenaries, she realized. Paid men, dangerous men. "Stay quiet," Maria whispered to her patients, guiding them into the back rooms. Old Carlos, the clinic's guard, more ceremonial than capable at his age, hobbled toward the door with his revolver. He didn't stand a chance. Maria reached out. "Carlos, don't." But it was too late. They shoved him aside as if he were weightless, his weapon clattering uselessly on the floor. Maria rushed to his side, cradling his shoulder as he groaned. And then the leader stepped into the clinic. "Where is the American doctor?" he barked in English, his voice clipped harsh. His eyes scanned everything with predatory sharpness. Maria froze. Dr. Williams had left last week. She was alone now, the only foreign staff. "He's not here," she said, steadying her voice. "He's away for a conference." The leader studied her. His silence felt longer than it was. Then came the words she feared. "You'll do." Two men moved forward, their hands gripping her arms. She struggled, but not recklessly. Patients were still in the building. Resistance now could get them killed. "I can't leave," she protested, her voice cracking between courage and desperation. "They need me. Some are very sick." The leader's laugh was cold. "They are not our concern, you are." Her wrists were bound with plastic ties, rough but not tight enough to cut circulation. She made sure of that, her first silent act of resistance. They thought she was just a frightened civilian. Let them, for now. Dragged toward the door, Maria lifted her chin. She counted, always count. 6 men, rifles, AK variants modified, radios with throat mics, professional posture, and then her eyes lifted to the helicopters. Older Bell models, military surplus, patched but functional. She marked every detail, tail numbers, rotor pitch, fuel lines. Her father's voice whispered in her memory, "Always know your aircraft, Maria. Knowledge is survival." They shoved her into the rear of the first helicopter. 2 guards boxed her in on either side. The leader slid into the co-pilot seat. The rotors bit into the air, lifting them violently into the sky. Through the scratched window, Maria studied the ground below. Mountains folded into valleys, rivers cut through stone, and thin dirt roads snaked between villages. She traced every landmark with her eyes, burning them into memory. A map without paper. She would need it. The men spoke freely now, believing their captive couldn't understand much. Spanish laced with Portuguese. They discussed ransom, weeks of waiting, isolation in a compound where no roads reached. They spoke about her like cargo. Valuable, helpless. Their first mistake. Maria Santos was many things. A nurse, a daughter, a sister, a woman shaped by compassion and service. But helpless was never among them. She had grown up on air bases, learned the language of engines before she was 12, memorized survival tricks from her brother before most girls her age cared about anything beyond school dances. She had always carried that knowledge quietly, never needing it. Until now. The helicopter descended into a hidden valley, the compound appearing like a scar in the forest. Concrete buildings, Towers, fences, men with weapons, no roads, only sky access, a prison designed by arrogance. They dragged her into a windowless room, bare cot, a table, a bucket, a single bulb swaying above. The leader smirked as he cut her restraints. Your new home, don't try to scream, don't try to run. Orders are simple, shoot to kill. The door slammed, locks clattered into place. Maria sat on the cot, breathing slow. She scanned everything, the cracks in the concrete, the loose bolts on the light fixture, the sound of footsteps fading. She built a mental sketch of weaknesses. Patience, she reminded herself. Patience and timing. She remembered her father teaching her how to read cockpit instruments. Her brother showing her how to disappear into shadows during training games. None of it had seemed vital then. But now, locked in concrete silence, those lessons were alive again, coiled inside her. The next days blurred into routine. Food brought, questions asked. Guards changing shifts with robotic predictability. Maria played the role they wanted, quiet, resigned, cooperative. She nodded, she obeyed, and she listened, always listening. On the third day, an accident broke the monotony. A guard sliced his hand open. They dragged him in, demanding Maria treat it. She requested bandages, antiseptic, sutures. They fetched a kit, thrust it into her hands. As she stitched the wound, she memorized every tool. Scalpel, thread, scissors, alcohol. She palmed the scalpel, slipping it into her shoe unnoticed. A weapon, small but sharp. Her first true piece of leverage. The injured guard returned later with gratitude in his eyes. He brought her extra bread. He spoke more than the others, about his sick daughter, about promises of money, about regret. Maria listened. Compassion was her nature, but calculation guided her now. Was no friend, but he was a crack in the armor. Nights were her training ground. She did quiet push-ups, stretched, worked her hands against the restraint bolts. She loosened the light fixture until it hung by threads. She bent metal scraps into picks. Each action small, invisible, but each night she was closer. The compound's rhythm became hers. Dawn, shift change. Midday, noise, activity. Afternoon, lull, night, silence broken only by radios. She knew when they slept, when they were alert, when they were careless. The helicopters rested at the edge of the compound, two machines that represented both prison and freedom. She watched them during her rare escorted walks. She memorized the pilot's habits. The loud one, always complaining about engines, maintenance problems, spare parts, mechanical weaknesses. Her father's words pulsed again. Power, fuel, flight controls. Learn one aircraft, you understand them all. It was during one of these medical errands under nervous escort that Maria entered the maintenance shed. Tools on walls, manuals stacked on shelves, aviation fuel drums chained behind fences. Her fingers longed to touch the wrenches, the cutters, the pages of diagrams. She disguised her hunger as indifference, but her mind drank everything in. That night, lying on the cot, she counted steps in her head. From her cell to the helicopters, 347, each turn memorized, each landmark marked. Her window was narrow. Between 3 and 4 a.m., when night guards were tired and the day shift hadn't yet stirred. 15 minutes to move unseen. 15 minutes to cut locks, reach the helicopter, start an engine, and rise into the sky before the compound woke. It sounded impossible, which meant it was possible just barely. But she needed more than time. She needed chaos, something to distract, something to misdirect, something small enough to build from nothing. So she became an inventor, cotton bandages, antiseptic, wiring stripped from the light, a crude smoke device, not elegant but effective, enough to blur cameras, enough to spark confusion. On the 10th night, she lay in the dim glow of the bulb, staring at the cracks in the wall, her body still, her mind alive. Tomorrow, she thought, tomorrow it begins. The nurse was almost gone. Something else was rising in her place, something her captors hadn't accounted for. Because Maria Santos was no longer just waiting to be rescued. She was planning to rescue herself. What does courage look like in the dark? Is it the absence of fear or the decision to move despite it? Maria Santos lay on the cot, eyes open in the silence when she heard it, a fight breaking out beyond her door. Raised voices, the sharp crash of a bottle, a man crying out in pain. Then boots stomping, a command barked. Moments later, the lock screeched and the door banged open. Two guards shoved her into the corridor. "Nurse, now." Her pulse leapt, but her face stayed composed. She followed, barefoot on cold concrete, toward the medical station. Inside, a mercenary sat bleeding, a jagged gash carved across his arm from broken glass. His comrades hovered, impatient. Maria assessed quickly. Too much blood, wrong angle for simple bandaging, sutures required. She demanded supplies. They shoved the kit across the table. She leaned over the wound, steady hands moving with the confidence of years in field clinics. Needle threaded, flesh pulled together. But she wasn't just stitching skin. Her eyes flicked around the room. A bag left open, a vial of lidocaine unguarded, a pair of extra scalpels gleaming under fluorescent light. Opportunity doesn't knock twice, it whispers. She slipped her hand across the table, palmed the vial, slid a scalpel beneath her sleeve, tucked thread into her pocket. Small gains, but each one was survival. When she was done, she pressed the bandage firmly and leaned back. "He'll keep his arm," she said. Her voice sounded calm. Inside, her heart thundered. As they marched her back, she kept her breathing even. In her shoe, the first scalpel. In her sleeve, the second. In her pocket, the vial, the beginnings of freedom. That night she sat cross-legged on the cot, her trophy spread before her. Tools disguised as medical remnants. Weapons hidden in plain sight. She felt something stir in her chest. Not joy, not yet, but possibility. The next day the leader came himself. His mask was gone, revealing hard lines etched by years of violence. "We've made contact with your people," he said. "Soon you'll be free, for a price." Maria looked down, feigning relief. Inside, her mind spun. A ransom meant movement. A ransom meant relocation. More guards, more eyes, less chance. She couldn't wait. That night she worked on the lock. Her makeshift pick scraped inside the corroded mechanism. She whispered to herself, as her brother had once taught her during practice drills, "Don't force it. Listen. Feel the pins. Every lock wants to open if you're patient enough." The first tumbler clicked. Then the second. Sweat rolled down her temple. Finally the third. The bolt slid. She froze, heart hammering. The lock was open. She could leave now. But leaving without a plan was suicide. Guards everywhere. Radios. Guns. Helicopters only 300 meters away, yet separated by fences, towers, search patterns. So she closed the lock again, training herself, building readiness. Escape required precision, not desperation. Days bled into each other. She tended minor injuries among guards, each time gathering small resources. A piece of wire here, a strip of metal there. Lingered by her cell more often. His nervous eyes softened with guilt. He slipped her extra bread, once even an orange. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly one evening. "My daughter," he whispered, glancing at the cameras. "She's sick. The money was supposed to save her, not this." Maria studied him. His humanity wasn't gone, only buried. But could she trust him? Trust was dangerous. Trust could break her plan, yet compassion pulled at her. "You should go home to her," she whispered, "before you can't." He looked away, as if the words hurt more than the truth he already knew. By the 10th night, Maria's plan was nearly complete. The smoke device sat hidden inside her cot. Her were sharp and reliable. She had memorized every patrol path, every blind corner. Between 3 and 4 a.m. she would have her chance. She rehearsed it silently. Pick lock, exit cell, hug shadows, pass the fuel depot, trigger distraction, reach the helicopter, start engine, lift off. She could hear her father's voice describing the start sequence: battery on, fuel pumps, throttle, ignition. She replayed it until it felt carved into her blood. Then the unexpected came. On the 11th day, the leader's face appeared again. "We have what we need. Soon we move you. Different location, heavier security." Maria smiled faintly, eyes lowered. Inside, panic surged. If they moved her, the window closed. She would vanish into some deeper hell, maybe never to return. She had one night left. That evening, as the sun bled across the mountain peaks, she prepared. She pressed her ear against the concrete, listening for guard changes. She hid the scalpel in her waistband, tucked the vial of lidocaine in her sleeve, slipped the smoke device into her pocket. She whispered a prayer, not for safety, but for clarity. At 2:30 a.m., the compound quieted. Radios crackled faintly, then faded. Boots scuffed at the gate. The night guards were tired, their voices lazy. Maria knelt at the door, slid the pick into the lock, and worked. Click, click. The bolt slid free. She pulled the door open inch by inch, every creak echoing like thunder in her ears. Cool air rushed in. Freedom was a scent, sharp and metallic. She stepped into the shadows, bare feet whispering against the dirt. She kept low, every movement deliberate. Past the barracks, past the dim glow of the guard shack. Her heart raced, but her hands were steady. The fuel depot loomed ahead. A sensor light glared above it, ready to expose her. She pulled the smoke device, struck it, tossed it near the sensor. A hiss, a bloom of smoke. The light snapped on, but all it revealed was a hazy cloud. "What the hell?" a guard called, squinting into the fog. He tapped the light, muttered, then dismissed it as a glitch. Maria moved, fast, low, silent. She slipped into the maintenance shed, her fingers finding the tools she had marked days before. Wire cutters, flashlight, wrench. She clutched them tight, then crept toward the helicopter. It was the same aircraft that had carried her here. The door was unlocked. She slid inside, the cockpit familiar in its alien strangeness. Her father's voice whispered through memory, "Every helicopter is the same at heart. Power, fuel, flight controls." She flipped switches by feel. The panel glowed faintly. Her pulse spiked. She was closer than ever. Then voices. Two guards approaching, boots crunching gravel. Maria ducked, pressing herself flat against the seat. A flashlight beam swept across the cockpit window. One guard tapped the fuselage. "Says this bird's running rough. Maybe we should check it." "Tomorrow, supply runs early. Looks fine to me." The beam lingered. Maria held her breath until her lungs ached. If they opened the door, it was over. She wrapped her fingers around the scalpel, ready to strike if she had to. But the light moved away. Their footsteps faded. Maria exhaled slowly. Then she worked faster. She powered the systems, checked fuel, engaged the starter. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared. Rotor blades groaned to life. Shouts erupted outside. A guard screamed, "Stop her, she's in the helicopter." Gunfire split the night. Bullets shattered glass, sparked off metal. Maria ducked, pushing throttle forward. The helicopter lurched, blades clawing at the sky. She gritted her teeth, pulling the machine higher. Her heart soared until black smoke poured from the exhaust. The engine stuttered. Warning lights flared. The roughness had complained about was real. The helicopter trembled, struggling to lift. Bullets tore through the fuselage. Maria fought the controls, whispering through clenched teeth, "Come on, just get me out of here." The compound shrank below, muzzle flashes scattering like fireflies. She cleared the fence barely, climbing into the night. But the engine groaned. Oil pressure dropped. Vibrations shook the frame. She had minutes, maybe less. Behind her, the second helicopter roared to life. Pursuit would come fast. Freedom was hers, but fragile, fleeting, burning away like smoke. And still, for the first time in days, Maria felt something close to joy. Because she was no longer their prisoner, she was her own. What does freedom cost when the machine carrying you begins to die midair? Maria gripped the trembling controls, the helicopter rattling beneath her like a wounded beast. Warning lights screamed across the panel. oil pressure dropping, temperature spiking. The smell of burning filled the cabin. She had stolen her captor's sky, but it was slipping through her fingers. "Hold together," she whispered, "just a little longer." The rotors struggled, blades cutting the cold mountain air unevenly. Each vibration jolted through her bones. Below, jagged ridges clawed upward, trees like black spears in the moonlight. If she went down here, it wouldn't matter what she had stolen. She would vanish into the rocks, a broken story no one would ever hear. The engine coughed, shuddered, and finally failed. Silence, except for the fatting whine of the rotors winding down. Training not hers but her father's voice from memory took over. Auto-rotation, Maria. Use the air itself to land you when power dies. Glide the blades, guide them. She forced the controls forward, coaxing the aircraft into a controlled descent. The world tilted, spun, steadied. A ridge appeared, a thin strip of relative flatness among the chaos of stone. She aimed for it, fighting physics, fighting fear. The impact was violent. Metal screeched against rock, the helicopter skidding sideways, sparks exploding as the skids tore through stone. Maria braced, teeth rattling, body slamming against the seat. And then stillness. Steam hissed from the engine. The cockpit filled with smoke. Maria coughed, unbuckled, and stumbled out into the night air. She collapsed against a boulder, lungs burning, body trembling with shock. She was alive, bruised, battered, but alive. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, she looked up at the stars without bars between her and the sky. She sucked in the thin mountain air, each breath sharp and painful. Freedom wasn't clean. It was jagged, but it was hers. And yet she wasn't safe. Far off, faint but growing, came the steady thrum of rotors. Her pursuers were in the air. The second helicopter. They would follow the smoke trail from her crash like wolves hunting blood. Maria pushed herself upright, forcing her aching muscles to obey. She couldn't stay here. She needed cover, high ground, concealment. She stumbled through the rocks, gathering what she could from the wreckage. A first aid kit, a flare gun, the radio equipment. No food, no proper clothing, just thin fabric, survival knowledge, and will. She found a cave half a mile away, its mouth hidden by tangled brush. Crawling inside, she collapsed against the cool stone. The cave smelled of earth and old rain, but it was shelter. It was cover. The rotors passed overhead minutes later, sweeping the valley with searchlights. She pressed herself into the shadows, heart hammering as beams slashed across the mountainside. They hovered above the wreckage, voices faint over their radios. Then, silence. The hunt would soon move on foot. Maria stared at the radio kit in her lap. She couldn't call for help, not yet. The mercenaries would be monitoring frequencies. A signal now would be a beacon. But her brother had taught her more than just how to call. He had shown her how to disrupt, to bend signals, to turn tools into weapons. She unpacked the components, her fingers moving despite exhaustion. She fashioned a crude jamming device, limited range, but effective enough to scramble communications. A small edge in a vast wilderness. By dawn, the mercenaries were already on the ground. Maria could hear them from her cave, voices echoing, footsteps crunching gravel. 6 of them, she counted. The leader's voice sharp, clipped, furious. She can't have gone far. Injured, alone, check every cave, every ravine, bring her back. Maria's stomach tightened. They believed she was prey. That belief would be their second mistake. Her body ached, her lip was split, her arms were scratched raw, but beneath the pain lived a new rhythm, resolve. She wasn't simply escaping anymore. She was hunting her freedom. The first mercenary appeared by chance, moving alone through a ravine below her position. Maria crouched on the rocks above, heart thundering, palms slick. She had one scalpel, one chance. She waited until he was beneath her, then dropped a stone. The man spun, scanning the trees. Maria triggered her smoke device, dropping into the haze. He coughed, swore, stumbled. Maria moved fast. She slipped behind him, scalpel pressed to his throat. "Quiet," she hissed. He struggled, but she pressed a nerve in his arm just as her brother had shown her years ago. The man crumpled, unconscious. Her chest heaved. She bound him with surgical thread, stripped his weapon, his radio, a rifle, ammunition. For the first time since capture, she held real power in her hands. The mercenaries' radios crackled. "Bravo, bravo," respond. Static, confusion. Maria allowed herself a small smile. She faded back into the forest. Hours passed. She used the rifle not as a weapon but as a tool for leverage. She planted false trails, dragging branches to mimic footsteps. She placed noisemakers made from salvaged metal, sending echoes into empty ravines. She turned the forest into her ally, shaping its silence into traps. One by one, they stumbled into her games. Another man followed a false trail into thick undergrowth, only to be blinded by a flare she fired from above. While he staggered, she slipped behind him, striking his temple with the rifle butt. He went down. The third she found dozing against a tree, exhaustion breaking his discipline. She crept close, syringe in hand, the vial of lidocaine repurposed into a sedative. One quick puncture, one breathless wait, and he sagged into sleep. Maria dragged him into shadows, heart pounding with adrenaline and guilt. She wasn't killing them. She couldn't. Her hands were trained to heal, but she was neutralizing them one by one. The forest became hers. Every rustle of leaves, every shifting shadow whispered to her. She felt her fear transform into something sharper, focus. By late afternoon, she had stripped 3 men of their weapons, radios, and supplies. Water, food rations, a jacket. She was stronger now. The balance was shifting. The leader's voice cut through the static of the stolen radio. Rage laced every word. "How is one woman doing this to you? She's a nurse, not a soldier." Maria listened, silent in the shadows. Not a soldier, she thought, but not helpless either. As the sun dipped low, she studied the valley. Their helicopter circled overhead, its search pattern tightening. Fuel would be low soon. They would need to land. And that would be her moment. She set the jamming device near the ridge. When the helicopter attempted to lift away at dusk, its instruments flickered, needles spinning. Confusion crackled across their radios. The bird wobbled, turned, then descended in an emergency, landing less than a mile from her. Maria watched from the high ground, rifle in hand, her breath steady. For the first time since her capture, she wasn't the one being hunted. The mountains were hers now. And tomorrow she would prove it. What happens when the hunted realizes the terrain no longer belongs to her enemies, but to her? Maria Santos crouched among the rocks as dawn spilled pale light into the valley. Below, their helicopter sat crippled, its rotors still but its frame intact. Around it moved the remaining mercenaries, shadows packing, nervous voices breaking over radios. 6 had landed. By last night, 3 had been silenced by her hand. That left 3 men and their leader, 4 against 1. She adjusted the stolen rifle against her shoulder. Its weight felt both foreign and familiar. She wasn't a soldier, but the metal carried a strange steadiness in her grip. The sights framed her captors perfectly. She could pull the trigger now, end it, but her finger wouldn't move. Healing had been her life. Taking life, even theirs, even after everything they had done, she wasn't ready. So she waited, she studied, she planned. The leader barked orders, his voice sharp, full of frustration. "We spread out again. She's close. She has to be. Keep your radios on. I want her alive." Alive, not dead. That meant leverage still mattered. That meant time still existed. Maria retreated deeper into the trees, her steps careful, calculated. The forest was her armor now. Every branch she snapped, every print she left was deliberate misdirection. She guided them where she wanted, not where she was. By mid-morning, she had isolated another one. A younger mercenary, shoulders slumped with fatigue, muttering curses in Spanish as he trudged through the brush. His rifle hung loose. His head swiveled too slowly. He was afraid. Maria pressed her back against a tree, heart thudding. She didn't think. She acted. She kicked a stone downslope, then melted into the opposite direction. The man followed the sound, his boots scraping rock. As he passed, she stepped out behind him, rifle raised. "Drop it." He froze, his hands went up. She could see him trembling, the mask slipping from his face. Not a monster, just a man with fear in his eyes. "Drop it," she repeated. The rifle clattered to the ground. Maria's own hands shook, though she fought to hide it. "Radio," she ordered. He handed it over slowly, eyes wide. "Please," he whispered, "I don't want this." Her jaw clenched. She wasn't here to grant wishes. She struck him across the temple with the butt of her rifle. He dropped like a stone. She bound his wrists with surgical thread, gagged him, and dragged him behind a fallen log, another piece removed from the board. Her chest heaved as she crouched beside him. Compassion warred with survival. She hated the fear in his eyes, hated the part of herself that had to ignore it. But if she hesitated, if she faltered, she would lose everything. By noon, only 3 remained. The leader grew more reckless. His shouts carried through the valley, barking commands that sounded less like orders and more like desperation. "She's one woman, one nurse. How are you letting this happen?" Maria listened from the shadows, the stolen radio pressed against her ear. Every angry word was a gift. The more he yelled, the more mistakes they made. She decided to show them something, not violence, presence. She scaled the ridge above their helicopter, moving low and silent until she could see them clearly. The leader and 2 others, rifles clutched, scanning the trees nervously. She raised the flare gun she had scavenged and fired. A red streak cut across the sky, bursting above their heads. The mercenaries ducked, panicked, shouting to each other. Where did it come from? Maria melted away before they could respond. She wanted them jumpy. She wanted them rattled. Fear was its own weapon, sharper than any blade. The day dragged on, the mountains playing tricks on light and shadow. Maria used the hours to circle them, her steps ghosting across terrain she now knew better than they did. She left false trails, whispers of her passage where none truly existed. She guided them like sheep toward the cliffs, where the ground grew treacherous, where footing betrayed the careless. By late afternoon, one of them fell into her trap. She watched as he stumbled onto loose gravel, sliding down a slope with a cry. His rifle clattered away. Maria descended fast, tackling him before he could recover. His fist caught her jaw. Pain flared, but instinct overrode. She jammed the scalpel against his throat, eyes burning. "Don't move." He froze. His breath came in short, terrified bursts. Maria's hand trembled as the blade pressed against skin. It would be so easy. One motion, one less enemy. But she couldn't. She shoved him face first into the dirt, bound his wrists with surgical thread, and gagged him. Her chest heaved as she pulled away, leaving him pinned against the earth. 2 left, the leader and his last man. As the sun dipped low, the valley fell into twilight. Shadows stretched long, turning the world into something primal. Maria sat in her cave, rifle across her lap, staring at the flare gun in her hand. Her body ached. Her stomach growled, but her mind hummed with clarity. She had flipped the balance. The nurse was gone. The captive was gone. What remained was something harder, something she wasn't sure she recognized. Her brother's voice echoed from memory. Sometimes survival demands choices you don't want to make, choices that change you. She looked at her hands. They were steady now, not trembling. She wasn't sure whether to be proud or afraid. Night came. The leader's voice crackled over the radio, ragged, tired, desperate. "She can't win, she can't." Maria smiled, though it was thin, haunted. She already had. But tomorrow she would prove it. The hunt was almost over. And for the first time since captivity began, Maria wondered what would be left of her once it ended. How long can fear sustain itself before it curdles into desperation? The question lingered in Maria's mind as she crouched on the ridge, staring down at the valley. Only 2 remained, the leader, and the shadow who followed him still. The rest were bound, silenced, scattered like broken pieces across the mountainside. They would wake later to their own confusion, stripped of radios, rifles, and dignity. But the two still standing, they were different, harder, more dangerous. The leader never stopped moving. His posture was rigid, his eyes scanning constantly. He barked orders even when no one answered. His anger was fuel, keeping him sharp. His companion, a broad man with a scar running down his cheek, was quieter, steadier, loyal, dangerous in his calm. Maria lay in the brush, rifle in hand, her stomach pressed flat against cold stone. She studied their patterns, the way they checked each other's blind spots, the way they avoided shadows now, sticking to open ground where surprise was harder to stage. She had rattled them, but rattled didn't mean broken. Her finger brushed the trigger guard. She could end this from here. One shot, maybe two, but hesitation locked her hand, a nurse pulling a trigger, a life snuffed by her will, her throat tightened. She couldn't, not like this. So she waited. The wind shifted through the pines, carrying fragments of their voices upward. "Don't underestimate her again," the man muttered. "She's one woman," the leader snapped back. "One nurse, and we are professionals." Maria almost laughed at the bitterness in his tone. Professionals, reduced to chasing ghosts in the dark, losing men to traps and silence. Still, arrogance was armor. She had to strip it away completely. She pulled the small radio she'd scavenged from the others. Static crackled as she pressed the button. Her voice was low, steady. "You're running out of time." The mercenaries froze. Their heads jerked upward, eyes scanning the ridges. "Who is this?" the leader barked. "You know," Maria whispered. "You've known since the first one didn't answer." Silence, then laughter, bitter and sharp. "You think you've won. You're one woman alone in these mountains. You can't keep this up forever." Maria released the button, heart hammering. She slipped away before they could triangulate. But she had seen it, the flicker in their eyes, the way their confidence cracked. They weren't hunting anymore. They were surviving her. As night crept in, Maria returned to her cave, exhaustion pressing on her bones. She unwrapped a ration she had stolen, chewing slowly, staring at the flare gun resting across her knees. She had weapons now, tools, tactics. But what unsettled her most wasn't the fight outside. It was the fight within. When had she crossed the line? When had she stopped being a captive trying to escape and become something else, something colder? Each mercenary she tied down, each radio she silenced, each trap she built, it was a step further from who she had been. She pressed her forehead against the cave wall, whispering to herself, "I'm still me. I'm still Maria." But the words felt thin against the weight of what she had done. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, listening to the mountains breathe, waiting for the dawn to decide her. When it came, the leader made his move. Gunfire shattered the silence, echoing through the valley. The cave mouth lit up with sparks as bullets chewed into stone. Dust and rock rained down. Maria dropped flat, covering her head. They had found her. Her heart slammed as she crawled deeper into the cave, the rifle clutched tight. The leader's voice roared over the gunfire. "Enough hiding, face us." His companion fired controlled bursts, keeping pressure constant. Stone chipped around her. Maria's lungs burned with dust. She scrambled toward the back of the cave. Not trapped. Not yet. She knew this cave system. She had marked its branches days ago. There was another way out, narrow, crawling, but there. She squeezed into the passage, dragging the rifle behind her. The stone scraped her shoulders, tore her arms, but she kept going. Behind her, the mercenaries advanced into the main chamber, flashlights slicing darkness. Maria emerged onto the ridge above them, gasping for air. She spun, aimed her rifle down at the cave mouth. The leader and his man were below, backs turned, lights probing. This was her chance. Her finger curled against the trigger. Her breath slowed. Her sights lined up on the leader's broad shoulders. And she froze. Her chest ached. She saw not just mercenaries but men, broken men, dangerous men but human still. To pull the trigger was to cross a line she couldn't return from. She clenched her teeth, lowering the rifle. Not like this. Instead, she raised the flare gun. The red streak hissed downward, exploding against the rocks near their feet. The men cursed, blinded by light and smoke. Maria moved fast, repositioning down the ridge. She fired again, the flare bursting above them this time, showering sparks. The man stumbled, disoriented. Maria dropped from the ridge, striking him with the rifle butt. He went down hard, groaning, dazed. She tore the weapon from his grip, kicked it away. But the leader was on her in seconds. His fist slammed into her ribs, knocking air from her lungs. She staggered back, rifle slipping. He advanced, a predator's snarl on his lips. "You think you've beaten me," he growled. His boot slammed into her side. Pain shot white-hot through her body. "You're nothing but a nurse playing soldier." Maria's vision blurred. Her breath came ragged. She looked up at him, teeth gritted against pain. "I am a nurse," she rasped. Her hand slipped into her pocket, closing around the last scalpel. "And you should never underestimate one." She slashed upward, the blade glinting in the dim light. The leader roared as the scalpel cut across his arm. He staggered, blood spilling. His rifle slipped from his grasp. Maria kicked it away, rising with every ounce of strength left. She drove her shoulder into his chest, slamming him against the rocks. His head cracked against stone. He slumped, dazed but breathing. Maria staggered back, chest heaving, scalpel still trembling in her grip. She could finish it. One thrust, one end. But she couldn't, not that line, not ever. Instead, she bound his wrists with the last of her surgical thread, tight, secure. She looked down at him, her chest aching with both triumph and sorrow. It was over. For the first time, silence stretched across the valley, unbroken by gunfire, unbroken by pursuit. Maria sank against a boulder, the scalpel slipping from her hand. Tears stung her eyes, not of weakness, not of relief, but of the strange, haunting truth. She had survived by becoming someone she didn't entirely recognize. And yet through it all, she had kept one thing intact. She hadn't crossed the line she feared most. The hunted had become the victor, but the nurse had not become the killer. The mountains held the silence of her decision. And in that silence, Maria finally allowed herself to breathe. What does silence sound like after a storm of violence? Maria Santos sat slumped against a cold boulder, her chest rising and falling in ragged bursts. Around her, the valley lay still, as if the mountains themselves had stopped to watch. The leader of the mercenaries groaned faintly where she had bound him, his wrists laced tight with surgical thread that bit into skin. Nearby, the man lay unconscious, breathing shallow but steady. The others, those she had disarmed, silenced, tied down days earlier, remained scattered across the valley like ghosts, all of them alive, all of them defeated. Maria pressed a trembling hand to her side where the leader's boot had landed. Pain throbbed deep, every breath a reminder of how close it had come. She swallowed hard, forcing her lungs to calm. It was over. But her mind refused to believe it. Every shadow still looked like a threat. Every rustle of wind through the pines made her flinch. Weeks of captivity and days of hunting had rewired her senses. She had learned to survive by assuming death lurked everywhere. Shutting that off was harder than she imagined. Her hands shook as she picked up the stolen radio. The device was battered but workable. She pressed the button, her voice low, steady despite exhaustion. "This is Maria Santos, nurse, civilian, location Mountain Valley, coordinates." She gave what she could from memory, tracing landmarks she had memorized on that first flight in. "Captors incapacitated, require extraction." She released the button, static hissed, no reply. Her stomach twisted. What if they weren't listening? What if the mercenaries had jammed frequencies she couldn't reach? She tried again, adjusting dials, sending her voice into the void. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat trickled down her temple. Then crackle a voice, distant, faint. Say again, identify. Relief surged through her so hard her knees nearly buckled. She pressed the button again. Maria Santos, civilian, held hostage, escaped. Coordinates approximate. Static cut in, but she heard the most important words. Copy, hold position, assistance en route. Her shoulders sagged. Tears stung her eyes, hot and unbidden. Rescue was coming. For the first time since that Tuesday morning at the clinic, hope was real. But hope came tangled with something else, responsibility. Maria looked at the men she had captured, bound, helpless. Their masks torn away, their humanity plain now in the morning light. Not monsters, not faceless shadows. Men with sweat and blood and fear, just as human as she was. Her chest tightened. She hated them, she them. Both feelings lived inside her at once. She knelt beside the leader, his face pale, his arm still bleeding from her scalpel's cut. His eyes opened, hazy but burning with rage. "You'll regret this," he rasped. Maria met his gaze steady. "No, you will." She pressed a strip of cloth against his wound, binding it tightly. Not out of mercy alone, out of duty. She couldn't let infection or blood loss claim him before justice did. Her hands, no matter what else they had done, were still a nurse's hands. Hours passed in heavy silence. Maria gathered the others, dragging them with effort to a single clearing near the crippled helicopter. By midday, 6 mercenaries sat bound in a ring, stripped of weapons, their radios disabled. Some glared at her with seething eyes. Some hung their heads in shame. The leader stared most of all, not at her hands, at her face, studying as if trying to rewrite what he thought he knew. "You're no soldier," he said finally, his voice cracked with both accusation and disbelief. "So how?" Maria sat opposite him, knees drawn to her chest, rifle resting across her lap. Her voice was quiet, steady. "I am a nurse, the daughter of a pilot, the sister of a soldier. I grew up learning things you thought didn't matter." She paused, her throat tightening. "And I learned to wait. You underestimated me because you wanted me to be helpless. That's the mistake you made from the beginning." The man spat on the ground, but his silence afterward told her more than his words. As the afternoon sun slanted through the trees, exhaustion caught up with her. Every bruise screamed, every cut ached. Her eyelids fluttered heavy, but she didn't let herself sleep, not fully. She drifted in half-rest, jolting awake at the faintest sound. The mountains grew quiet again, but Maria's mind did not. She replayed every moment, every scalpel, every knot of thread, every mercenary silenced in the night. She wondered what it meant that she hadn't killed. Was it mercy, or fear of what killing would make her? She wasn't sure anymore. Dusk approached when the sound came, low, distant but unmistakable. Rotors. Maria stiffened, rising to her feet, rifle clutched. Her eyes scanned the horizon until she saw them. Helicopters, small against the setting sun, growing larger with each heartbeat. Not mercenary birds this time. Sleek, painted in official markings. "Rescue." The mercenaries stirred, eyes widening, some shouting curses. Maria silenced them with a sharp command. "Quiet." The helicopters descended in controlled formation, dust and leaves whipping into the air. Soldiers poured out, real soldiers, uniforms sharp, weapons raised. Maria lifted her arms, rifle slung carefully across her back, signaling surrender. A man in fatigues approached, his voice cutting through the roar. "Maria Santos." "Yes," she croaked. Her throat was dry, her words thin. "That's me." His gaze shifted to the bound mercenaries. His eyes widened at the sight of them, 6 men subdued, sitting helpless, taken by one unarmed nurse. "What the hell happened here?" he muttered. Maria's lips parted, but words failed. How could she explain? How could she put into language the nights of fear, the days of hunting, the blur between mercy and brutality? She only shook her head. "They thought I was a captive," she said softly. "They were wrong." The soldiers moved quickly, securing the prisoners, checking Maria for injuries, ushering her toward the helicopter. But even as she stepped into the machine that would carry her away, she glanced back. The mercenaries sat in silence now, guarded by men with real power. The leader's eyes met hers one last time. His glare was gone. In its place, something heavier. Respect, grudging but undeniable. Maria turned away, heart heavy. The blades thundered to life. The helicopter lifted. The valley shrank beneath her. For 2 weeks it had been her prison, then her battlefield. Now it was fading into memory. But memory doesn't fade as fast as distance. The valley would live inside her long after the mountains disappeared. The nurse who had once feared helicopters would never see them the same way again. And as night fell over the horizon, Maria closed her eyes. For the first time, not to plot survival, not to scan for shadows, but to rest. Still, one question remained. What part of herself had she left behind in that valley? And what part had she brought out that she might never be able to put away again? What happens when survival becomes a story? When the private battles of one woman in the mountains are suddenly broadcast to the world? Maria Santos sat in a sterile room that smelled faintly of disinfectant, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Days had passed since her rescue, but the whirlwind hadn't slowed. Doctors had poked, soldiers had debriefed, officials had questioned. Now cameras waited outside, their lenses hungry for her face. She wasn't ready. Her ribs ached beneath layers of bandages. Her hands bore cuts that still hadn't healed. But what hurt most wasn't visible. It was the silence that lived inside her, the echo of rotors in the night, the memory of eyes staring at her from the dark. "Maria," a voice said gently. A young officer leaned forward, notes in hand. "We need you to walk us through it again. Everything you did, how you managed to survive." She stared at the table between them. Its surface was smooth, clean, unlike the rocks she had slept against. She lifted her eyes slowly. "You don't want to hear it," she whispered. "Yes, we do," the officer pressed. "The world wants to know. How did you turn it around on them?" Maria's lips parted, but no words came. Because how could she explain it without betraying the truth? That she hadn't been fearless. That she had been terrified, trembling, unsure every step. That she hadn't planned a heroic stand but simply refused to die quietly. "They assumed I was helpless," she said finally. Her voice was thin, raw. "They didn't see me. They only saw what they expected. That was their mistake." The officer nodded, scribbling notes. But Maria saw it in his eyes, curiosity edged with disbelief. They wanted a clean narrative. Nurse becomes warrior. Victim becomes victor. But reality wasn't clean. It was bruised, bloody, full of nights spent whispering prayers into stone. Later, they ushered her into a room filled with flashing lights. Microphones shoved forward. Questions fired like bullets. "Maria, how did you defeat trained mercenaries alone? Did you plan your escape from the start? Do you consider yourself a hero?" Maria blinked against the glare, her chest tightening. Hero. The word landed wrong. Heroes chose their battles. She hadn't chosen. She had adapted. She had survived. She leaned toward the microphones, her voice calm but steady. "I'm not a hero. I'm a nurse who refused to give up. That's all." The cameras clicked furiously, eager to capture humility as much as victory. But Maria knew what they would do. They would shape her into something she was, a headline, a symbol. That night in the quiet of her hospital room, she sat by the window, staring at city lights. They blinked like a different kind of fireflies, nothing like the muzzle flashes of the compound. She pressed her forehead to the glass, whispering to herself, "I'm still me. I'm still Maria." But was she? A knock pulled her back. The door opened and a familiar face entered. His wrists bore faint marks where she had bound him. His eyes were downcast, his movements hesitant. Maria stiffened, muscles tensing. "Why are you here?" "I turned myself in," he said quietly. I told them everything, about the compound, about the others, about my daughter. His voice cracked on the last word. They let me see you to thank you. Maria studied him, her chest tightening. Images flashed, slipping her extra bread, whispering about his sick child, helping her fetch supplies. He had been part of her captivity, but also part of her survival. "What do you want from me?" she asked. His eyes lifted, brimming with guilt. "Nothing, just forgiveness maybe. I didn't know it would be like that. I thought it was just guarding, easy money, enough to buy medicine. I was wrong." Maria looked away, her jaw tight. She remembered his daughter's name, remembered his shame. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but hatred wasn't simple either. "You made your choices," she said softly. "But so did I. I could have left you behind. I didn't." Nodded, his shoulders sagging. "That's why I'll testify, against them, against myself if I have to, because you gave me a chance my daughter may never have had without you." Silence stretched. Maria's heart twisted with something she couldn't name. When he left, she sat for a long time staring at the floor. She thought about mercy, about lines she hadn't crossed, about the strange weight of choosing not to kill, even when it might have been easier. The following week, hearings began. Officials paraded her story, showing photographs of the compound, the bound mercenaries, the helicopter wreck. They called her resilient, resourceful, extraordinary. Maria sat quietly, answering questions when required. But inside she was elsewhere, back in the mountains, crouched in shadows, waiting for footsteps to pass. The world clapped for her survival, but no one wanted to hear about the trembling, the crying, the moments she almost gave up. After the hearings, an officer approached her with a proposal. You could teach others, medical staff working in conflict zones, show them how to defend themselves, how to survive. Maria hesitated. The thought of standing in front of others, teaching what had come from blood and fear, it felt heavy, but maybe necessary. "I'll think about it," she murmured. That night she dreamed of the valley, of shadows chasing her, of flare light bursting above. She woke gasping, tears on her face. She pressed her palms to her eyes, whispering, "I survived. I survived." But survival didn't mean peace. Survival meant carrying pieces of the valley with her forever. The media continued to chase her, headlines painting her as the nurse who fought back. News anchors spoke her name with awe. Strangers sent letters, thanking her for proving that ordinary people could be extraordinary. Maria read some of them. She appreciated the kindness, but she also felt the distance between their words and her reality. They didn't know the sound of bullets tearing through glass. They didn't know the weight of a scalpel pressed against a man's throat, or the way mercy could feel heavier than violence. And yet she carried their letters in a box by her bed, because maybe, in their faith, she could find a kind of healing too. Weeks passed, bruises faded, cuts healed, but the deeper scars, the ones in memory, in spirit, remained. Maria walked through the city streets and flinched at the sound of helicopters overhead. She paused at the sight of uniforms, her body bracing before her mind caught up. She was free, but freedom carried echoes. One evening, as the sun set red across the rooftops, Maria stood on her balcony, breathing the warm air. She thought of the valley, of the mercenaries bound in a circle, of broken voice. She thought of her father teaching her about helicopters, her brother teaching her about survival. She thought of the nurse she had been before it all, and the woman she had become. Maybe she wasn't the same, maybe she never would be, but maybe that was the point. Sometimes survival doesn't mean going back to who you were. Sometimes it means learning who you are now. Maria whispered into the fading light, not for anyone else but for herself. "I'm still me, just changed." And for the first time since the mountains, she felt the faintest spark of peace. What does it mean to live after survival? Not just to exist, not just to breathe, but to carry forward what was learned in the shadow of death. Maria Santos stood in front of a classroom months later, her hands clasped behind her back. The faces watching her weren't soldiers. They were doctors, nurses, aid workers, the kind of people who had once been her peers, people who would walk into dangerous places with only medicine and compassion, believing those tools alone would protect them. She looked at them and saw herself before the mountains, before the compound, before the helicopter became her prison and her weapon. Knowledge, she said quietly, her voice steady, isn't just about medicine. It's about survival. It's about awareness. It's about refusing to be underestimated. She showed them how to watch without seeming to watch, how to listen to footsteps and read patterns in noise, how to use simple tools to escape bindings, how to find weaknesses in locked rooms, how to turn medical supplies into more than treatment, into leverage. Some faces in the room looked skeptical at first, but as she demonstrated, as she told fragments of her story, not the sensationalized version the world had written, but the small truths of patience, fear, and quiet resistance, the skepticism melted into attention. They took notes, they leaned forward, they began to understand. Maria finished by setting down the scalpel she carried as a reminder. "This saved my life more than once," she said, "not because I used it as a weapon, but because I believed I could. Survival is less about tools and more about what you decide you're capable of." When the class ended, a young nurse approached her wide-eyed. "Do you ever stop being afraid?" Maria paused, then she shook her head gently. "No, but you learn to walk with it. Fear doesn't disappear. It teaches you where to step." The nurse nodded, her shoulders squaring as if she had been handed something heavier than advice. Later, Maria sat alone in her small apartment, staring at the box of letters she still kept. Gratitude from strangers, praise from officials, stories of people who said they drew strength from hers. She opened one and read, "You prove that even when people assume the worst about us, we can still rise." She folded the letter carefully and placed it back. On her wall hung a photograph, taken by a local villager after the crash. The wrecked helicopter, its frame broken against stone, smoke curling into the sky. Locals had begun calling it the nurse's helicopter. A symbol, a story passed through villages like wildfire. Children pointed at the photo with wide eyes, repeating the tale of the woman who seized her captor's machine and turned it into her salvation. Maria looked at the picture often, not with pride but with a strange mix of grief and strength. That helicopter had carried her from prisoner to survivor, from nurse to something more complicated. It had cost her pieces of herself, but it had also revealed pieces she hadn't known existed. In the evenings, she visited her father's grave. She sat by the stone, speaking quietly into the dusk. "You were right, Papa. Knowing the aircraft saved me, but it wasn't just the machines. It was everything you and taught me: patience, observation, courage. Even when I didn't want it, I carried it, and it carried me home." The wind moved through the trees, gentle, almost like a reply. Her brother called often, his voice heavy with pride but careful not to smother her with it. "You did what most of us only train for," he said once. "You lived it, and you kept your soul intact." Maria hadn't answered then, but later, lying awake, she whispered to herself, "I hope so." Because keeping her soul intact didn't feel as simple as others thought. She had chosen not to kill. She had chosen mercy again and again. But mercy came with its own burden. The faces of the men she had spared haunted her sometimes, faces twisted in fear, in anger, in disbelief. She had beaten them, but she hadn't destroyed them, and she wondered in the quiet hours if they still dreamed of revenge. Still, she chose mercy, and she chose to live with its weight. 1 year later, Maria returned to the mountains. Not to the valley where she had been held. That place was sealed off, patrolled, studied by officials. But to a nearby village where aid workers were setting up a new clinic. The locals greeted her not with awe but with quiet respect. They called her Ladelle, the nurse of the helicopter, a title born of whispers passed from mouth to mouth. Children followed her through the village, wide-eyed, pointing to the sky whenever they heard the distant thrum of blades. "Is that yours?" they asked. Maria smiled faintly. "No, but I flew once." She bent to their level, her voice soft but firm. And you don't have to be afraid of the sound. Sometimes, what we fear most can carry us where we need to go. The children nodded, though their eyes still widened at the noise. That night, sitting by the fire outside the clinic, Maria thought about everything she had lost, everything she had gained. She thought about the woman she had been before, the nurse content to work quietly, to heal quietly, to serve quietly. And she thought about the woman she was now, the nurse who had walked through captivity, through violence, through survival. She was both, she was neither, she was something in between. And maybe that was enough. As the fire crackled, she whispered into the night, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The flames danced, carrying her words upward. The mountains were silent witnesses once again, holding her secret, her truth, her transformation. Maria Santos, once assumed helpless, had not just survived. She had carried her survival into a life that would touch others, long after the rotors stopped and the valley faded into memory. The hunted had become a teacher, the captive had become a symbol. And the nurse, always the nurse, had proven that sometimes the quietest hands can carry the loudest strength.